Is this a house of the cross? She asked, clenching her teeth. Do you love Christ? No, Mom, You want to celebrate its birth? Mom, it's just for... She opened the front door and threw the present out on the driveway. I wasn't thinking straight, so I just ran outside to get it, still in my pajamas. Burn it, she said, dropping a lighter on the welcome mat. Then she shut the door behind me. Mom, I called out. It's cold. Mom. Naked feet and 2 inches of snow. The shiny red wrapping paper crinkling between my fingers. I kept banging on the door, trying to explain myself. Mom, please. I must have stood there for 15 minutes. Then I lit the gift on fire. It was just this stupid pony figure I'd got it from a Happy Meal, but I knew that Stella would have loved it. She collected them, and she didn't have the purple one. It wasn't even about Christmas. I just wanted to give her something without making it weird. When all the red wrapping paper had turned to coal, Mom opened the door. She stared me down. I tried to physically hold my mouth still to keep my teeth from chattering. Is this a house of God? She asked. No, Mom. Who owns this house? The old blood. Who owns this family? The old blood. Who owns you? I looked up at her. She looked almost apologetic, holding a garbage bag in her left hand. She held it out to me, and I dropped the ruined gift in it. The old blood does, Mom. As it should, she nodded. Clean your hands, then eat your breakfast. My family is of the old blood. Just as there were pilgrims from England throwing themselves overseas to avoid persecution from the English Church, there were Scandinavian migrants fleeing something similar. Some, who mostly settled in New Hampshire, were those of the old blood, not too far from Pittsburgh, if you know the roads. Long before the church burned witches on the hills of Nyland, and long before the Vikings hung disemboweled thralls from our birch trees, there was the old blood, my dad used to say. And the spirits that govern the true laws of the world still await their due. It wasn't easy being a kid in that household. Outside the house, I was allowed to do whatever to blend in. But at home, we were a strictly pagan family. I could go caroling, I could go to church, I could listen to sermons, whatever I wanted, as long as I didn't bring any of it home. Home, where the old blood rested, was sacred. We had our customs, of course. On Walpurgis night, we would light 12 candles, one for each month, and eat a special kind of jam made of nettles. Instead of celebrating Christmas, we would perform a year walk to protect ourselves from the influence of false prophets for another year. We still had a tree though, but we didn't decorate it. It was meant as protection. Trees were of the old world, and bringing one into your home meant it couldn't be tainted by the false faith. But the biggest celebration of all, by far, was the summer solstice, the midsummer celebration, the day of the midnight sun. Dad would prepare a small meal out of a fir tree, and Mother would slaughter a chicken on it. She'd stuff the chicken with fir needles and spices, and then burn it along with the table in the backyard. Until the embers faded, we'd sit there, singing songs and sharing bread. It was a way to not only sustenance, but also labour and love. As you might imagine, it wasn't easy to live by these customs and rules. If anyone asked us, we were Christian, but Mom taught me that it was okay to lie to protect ourselves. The spirits didn't listen to words after all, they listened to our intentions. Still, I was terrified of someone finding out. Someone asking questions that I couldn't answer. I had this gnawing feeling that people could just sense that there was something off about me, like it somehow showed on my face. But I was no different from the other kids. I wore my graduation cap and shot rockets on the 4th of July. To those on the outside, I was just this ordinary kid who preferred not to bring any friends home. I would have been happy living that way for the rest of my life, but fate had other plans. The year I was scheduled to go to college, I sat down with my mom. I told her I'd met this girl, Lily. I told her how amazing Lily was. Her kindness, her bright smile, her nonsensical devotion to edible cupcake decorations. Lily and I had started to plan a life together, and I wanted my mum to be happy about it. Of course, she wasn't. Yeah, Lily considered herself a Christian. She wore a golden cross. She sang in the church choir. She saw it more as a part of her cultural heritage rather than a religious devotion. Trying to explain this to my mother, however, was useless. She was furious. "You would defile yourself on this whore of the cross," she spat. That pretty much ended the conversation. Ridding myself of that part of my life, Lily and I moved to Minnesota. I never told my parents where I went, so they wouldn't follow me. It was a real possibility that they'd try to get me back, or even harm Lily. Seeing how my mother reacted, I wouldn't put it past her. Since I couldn't afford college without the support of my family, I found a job at a local warehouse. Lily would study for years on end, ending up with a master's in aerospace engineering. Pretty advanced stuff. It wasn't until a few years ago that we decided to finally tie the knot, officially. I asked Lily to marry me, and she agreed. I asked her in the most appropriate way I could imagine, through cupcakes. She still has a soft spot for them. This opened a can of worms, though. Lily was insistent that I should ask my parents to be there for the ceremony, and I couldn't explain to her why that wasn't possible. My mom and dad in a church, seeing their only son being married to a Christian woman, I couldn't imagine it. Instead, I pleaded with her to just not. We'd do well with her side of the family, that'd be enough. For months, I thought the matter was settled. As summer came, Lily brought me along for a shopping trip to Minneapolis. She insisted on driving, and I must have fallen asleep somewhere along the main road. When I woke up, we were in the middle of nowhere. Just this big field with a couple of houses. A large clearing surrounded by fir trees and covered in high grass. It looked like an overgrown farm, possibly colonial. I had a bad feeling about it. This was a pretty damn far from Minneapolis. Lily was confident, though, and pulled me along with a smile. "Quite the surprise, huh?" she smiled. "Here we are." "It's something, all right." "What is it?" "Don't you recognize it?" Her smile faded. I tried to reassure her, but I just couldn't see it. I'd never been there before. "Your mom said you used to spend your summers here," she sighed. "Did I get it wrong?" Apparently, Lily had looked up my parents and talked to them on her own. She wanted to mend the wounds and reunite us as a surprise. For some reason, my mom had lied to her and tricked us into the middle of nowhere. Standing there, halfway between the house and the car, I got this chill up my spine. Tonight was the summer solstice. "You don't understand," I said. They're dangerous people. They're abusive. They... Honey, slow down. Are you saying you don't know this place?" "I'm saying I've never been here, and that they took us out here for a reason." Lily started to look nervous. I took her by the hand and hurried back to the car. I got in the driver's seat and started backing out. We didn't get far before the entire car shook with a sudden bang. Lily screamed. I noticed a set of one-way tire spikes ahead of us. All our tires had been shredded. I glanced at something in the rearview mirror. People, at least 6 of them. I grabbed my phone from the charger and got out of the car. "Lock the doors," I said. "Be ready to call for help." Lily started to dial her phone and locked the doors behind me. She took a few pictures. All 6 people walking towards us were dressed in white, with ox-eye daisies weaved into their hair. And while I only recognized 4 of them in passing, the 2 in front were far too familiar. Mom and Dad, a few grey hairs older than I'd last seen them. "I'm glad you came," Mom said. "Is that Lily? She sounded so nice on the phone." "Just let us go," I yelled back. "We don't want any trouble." "Aren't you staying for midsummer?" Dad asked, looking heartbroken. "I thought that was what you wanted. Our blessing for the marriage." "Not like this," I said. "Not tricking us." "Oh, come now," smiled Mom. "Don't pretend like you would willingly just come along if we told you not to come here." "Son, please," Dad sighed. "Listen to her. This is important to us." I won't let you hurt her. We won't. Just come along and we won't hurt her. Mum nodded. But if you see either of you waving your phones around, I'll have her tossed in the fire. We were out of options. Even if we called for help, they'd never let us go in time. Lily agreed. We had to play along. Leaving our phones in our car, we got out and started walking up to the colonial buildings. We were about 10 paces ahead of my parents and their entourage. I was about to start conspiring with Lily when my thoughts were cut short. All over the tree line, I could see others emerging. Must have been at least 20 people, all dressed in white. Some whom I recognized, others not so much. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all kinds of distant relatives. We had a big family, but we'd always kept to ourselves. A handful of times, Mum and Dad had gone to see them without me. Maybe this is what they'd been doing when the kids weren't allowed to tag along. Maypoles were being raised all over the clearing, 10 feet tall. Large crosses covered in grass, flowers and red ribbons, with 2 large rings hung on each end. 6 of them in total, evenly spaced. As each one rose, I could hear a jubilant yell coming from that direction. I'd heard about this sort of celebration, but I'd never seen it. The maypoles blessed the area as a haven for tired spirits. Lily held my hand and leaned in close. She was shaking, and I wasn't that much better off. What are they going to do? She whispered. There'll be a fire, I said. Dancing, singing, breaking bread. I thought back on the fir tables my dad used to make for midsummer. The dull knife my mother used to cut the head off a chicken. How she'd spray the table in blood until the carcass stopped moving. A sacrifice, I continued. Usually a chicken, but now? Maybe a cow? A goat? I didn't know. I thought it was just home. It's all my fault, I sighed. I just didn't want to expose you to them. She wrapped herself around my arm, sobbing. It broke my heart. Once we got to the yard, there were smiling faces all around. Everyone dressed in white, carrying countless baskets of flowers. Ox-eye daisies, dandelions, even a few sunflowers. Some yellow, some blue. All in all, it must have been close to 30 people. And in the middle of the yard stood a large table made of fir wood. Someone touched my shoulder, and I almost fell over trying to get away. How my mother had managed to sneak up on me, I'll never know. She wasn't the quiet type. We're getting ready for the bonfire. She needs to be involved. I'm not letting her out of my sight. Then you can start cutting the bread, Mum continued. It's by the kitchen. We kept to ourselves, just observing the others. There were so many details one might have missed if one didn't know where to look. For example, how they tied living snakes into the maypoles to better absorb any corruption that would try to enter. Or how no one wore wool, as to where fur of a prey animal would invite predators. 100 little rules, all put to practice. And there Lily and I were, on our knees, cutting bread. I could hear her muttering something under her breath. She had a thumb on a necklace, her golden cross. She was praying. Making sure no one could hear us, I leaned in close. Not here, I whispered. They're not rational. Have you done this? She whispered back. Are you part of this? No, not like this. But you know what it is? Usually, yes, but... Someone cleared their throat behind us. As I turned to see my dad, looking apologetically at me, I got to my feet. I'll just borrow him for a few minutes, Dad smiled. We'll be right back. The shadows were growing darker. In the old country, the midnight sun would keep the sky bright for days on end, but that's not the case for Minnesota. Still, it was probably around 7 p.m, and it was still bright outside. It messed with my sense of time. Dad looked back over his shoulder to make sure we were alone. He faced me. You love this girl? He asked. You want to spend the rest of your life with her? I know, she's a Christian, but... I'm not asking about that, he said, putting his hand on my cheek. I want to know if you love her. The real her. Do you? I looked back at Lily, staring at me from across the yard. Of course I loved her. I just nodded. Dad smiled and patted me on the shoulder. Then you'll be fine. An hour passed. They prepared a large table in the middle of the yard, decorating it with flowers and branches. I was growing nervous. My mother called out to the others using an old heralding call. This odd howling noise made to echo across fields. It was haunting. From every nook and cranny of the clearing came all these vaguely familiar faces in a sea of white. She spoke to them in the old tongue, and I could only make out a few words. She was giving thanks to the black-horned virgin, the goat-legged mother, the mountain spirits and the lands who nurtured us. She talked about our offering and the blessings we were thankful to receive, to bring new life into the steps of the old blood. Then, my dad stepped out of the kitchen, naked. It took me a few moments to realize what was happening. By the time I got to my feet, 4 men were on their way to hold me back. Lily just kept looking back and forth, not understanding. I was screaming. I don't even remember what. It just came out of me, like blood from a wounded soul. I screamed as they laid him out on the table. I screamed as they held the axe to the sky. I screamed my neck raw and my face flustered and red. But all those screams turned to cries of despair as the axe fell. This is why he wanted me to be sure. The greater the blessing, the greater the offering. Among dozens of jubilant voices and cheers, I cried like a child. They broke the table into pieces, using branches from a birch tree to spread the blood around. They cut him open, filling him with branches from the fir tree and spices. A dead head biting down on an apple, all put into a pile, neatly decorated and set aflame. Empty eyes refusing to meet my gaze, no matter how many times I cried his name. We were dragged in front of the fire. I remember sitting there, leaning on my knees, watching the fire eat away at everything we put forth. Licks of flame peeling away at a body freely given. Someone put a bowl into my hands. Bread and some sort of walnuts. Lily got a bowl too, but hers was different. It was mostly sunflower seeds. Eat up, my mother said, and you'll have my blessing. Lily just stared into the fire. I could see the flames reflecting in her wide eyes. Her eyes were tearing up as she forgot to blink. I curled up next to her and we ate together. It wasn't much. It'd be over soon. As we finished, they'd started to sing. I swear they'd all grown taller, like a head taller. Their eyes seemed brighter. The sun still hadn't set, even though it was well past 10 p.m. As the song grew louder, we were led away from the others. They dug a small hole, about 3 feet deep, large enough for 2 people. Lily, mistaking it for a shallow grave, started to panic. I just held her close. It's not that, I said. It's not that. It's not that. They stripped us of our clothes and laid us down. They covered us in branches and leaves as my mother watched us. You've been blessed, she smiled, and in the morning you'll be reborn. She looked different. Her eyes had lost their colour and her teeth had grown sharper. She too looked taller, younger. You may marry whoever you want, have many children. Come see me sometime. The singing from the bonfire had grown from hymns into screams, growing louder and animalistic. 2 men were attacking each other, beating each other raw. One woman was slamming her head with a rock. An older man was trying to shovel as much dirt as possible into his mouth. They were completely losing themselves, driven mad by the flames. As branch after branch covered us, Lily and I just stayed still, waiting for it all to be over. In a matter of minutes, the world turned dark. The sun finally set. All we had was each other and the howling of madmen. We curled up next to each other and waited for morning to come. At some point, we must have fallen asleep. I woke up to the sound of Lily choking. She was tearing at her throat, desperately feeling for something. Her necklace, holding a golden cross. She tore it off and breathed a deep breath of relief. We pushed the branches aside. It was a beautiful summer morning. Birds were singing and bees were buzzing about in the high grass. And there we were, naked and soot-covered. The colonial building still stood. All that remained from the bonfire was a black spot in the middle of the yard. The maypoles had been taken down. I just sat there for a second, trying to wrap my head around it all, as Lily dry heaved into the grass. "Lil," I asked, "are you okay?" She shook her head. I couldn't blame her. We picked up our clothes and made our way back to the car. The tyres were busted, but we could call for help. For a moment, we just sat there in our air-conditioned car, leaning back into our leather seats. I looked over at Lily. She was slightly paler, and her hair had grown darker. Her eyes, usually a clear green, looked almost mud brown. She just stared straight ahead. "Lil," I asked again, "what are you—" "Don't call me that," she interrupted. "That's not my name." "What do you mean that's not my name anymore?" she cried out. "She fucking baptized me." Lily turned to me, her eyes wild. She was different. Many of the little quirks I'd grown to love about her over the years were simply gone or changed. Even her voice seemed darker, rasper. "She baptized me and just, I feel it. I feel it in me. And it just feels wrong. It moves. It rearranges all the pieces. I leaned over and held her against my shoulder. Even her cries sounded different. We called the police, we got our car towed, and we filled out our reports. Lily showed the pictures she'd taken, but they didn't show that much. We got to shower and change our clothes. For the better part of the day, we just talked to people. Other people, not so much each other. A lot has happened since that day. There are no longer crosses in our house. Lily has asked me to call her by her new name, Vega. At night, I can hear her talking in a strange language, but she's still she. She still watches cupcake videos on YouTube, and she still smiles at me in the morning. She sings in the shower, and she kisses my cheek before we go to work. She's still the sweetheart I fell in love with. But something deep inside had fundamentally shifted. I can see the way she stares into open flames, the way she wrinkles her nose when we pass by a church. I can see how comfortable she's getting with a knife, how she doodles strange signs into her work notebooks. We're still getting married. That much hasn't changed. I'm just marrying Vega, not Lily. But that's fine. It's still her. It has to be.
The story starts around Christmas of 2017 or 2018. Can't remember. My grandmother's husband, who died in 2001, and his youngest brother died Christmas morning, leaving only one or two siblings left of that entire generation. I didn't know him, so I wasn't even affected at all. Fast forward the next morning. I'm sleeping on a couch in the family room, with a coffee table near me. Not something to brush up my leg against, but given the fact that I was very close to a coffee table, I brushed it off as my leg fell off the couch and brushed up against the table. It was 5:05 in the morning. At around 5:15, I decided to get up and play some Xbox. But as I got up from the couch, I saw the lazy boy recliner across the room, rocking back and forth. All I saw was an indentation in the seat. I wasn't scared, but rather stunned that this was happening. Startled, I backed into the archway into the family room, shining my flashlight onto the chair. I woke up both my mother and brother who were sleeping in there. Lots of crammed people in a smaller house. I then got into the fetal position on the edge of my mom's bed, with my back facing the room I was just in. Then, a crazy thing happened. At the exact same time for the next 2 mornings, my brother, who was now sleeping on that couch, had the same thing happen to him. Nothing has been paranormal in that house ever since.
I live in a haunted house. It was built by my paternal grandfather in the 70s, and all 4 of my grandparents hang around the place. There's been everything from dreams to apparitions around here, but none of it is really frightening. We know the ghosts and their family. My grandmothers, both maternal and paternal, are the most frequent visitors. They're notoriously active during the holiday season, and today brought the first major paranormal experiences. The holidays have truly begun. My mother and my niece were bringing up boxes of ornaments for the Christmas tree. They opened them up, and my niece pulled out a velvet box. Now, we've been using the same boxes for ornaments since I was born. I've never seen this velvet box before. My niece asked my mother what it was. My mother took it from her and opened it. Inside was my maternal grandmother's Bulova watch, which her husband gave her on their wedding day in 1948. This watch is a big deal. It's a family heirloom, and my grandmother never took it off. My mother swears she didn't inherit it, and if she had, it wouldn't have been in a plastic tub of Christmas tree ornaments, nor would it have been invisible for 11 years. This isn't the first case of my maternal grandmother causing jewellery to appear either. When I was very young, my mother lost her wedding ring. It was gone for over a month, and one morning she opened her jewellery box, and it was sitting atop the earrings she'd worn the day before. I've always believed in ghosts, like my whole life. I don't think I've ever been afraid of anything weird or unexplainable happening around me, because I feared that it could be a ghost or whatever. But yesterday, I had the weirdest experience of my life, and it left me terrified. So I'd had a pretty rough day. It was the last day of my college term, and I had had someone follow me home. I was a bit spooked, so my boyfriend came round since I was home alone with my dog. Anyways, we're playing with my dog, and then I decide to work on my university application at the dining table. My boyfriend starts to say he's going to go upstairs and snoop around for his Christmas presents. So I push the chair out and run after him, just as a joke thing. My dog stood at the bottom of the stairs, he's not allowed upstairs unless it's bedtime, and waited for us. We start hearing him crying, which is really unusual, so we go downstairs immediately and comfort him. When we go back to the dining table, my heart drops. My living room is open plan. It's a living and dining space with a gap in between. In the gap, there's a big sideboard unit that has pictures of my relatives, some passed on, some still alive. And then I've just put one up on a baby scan of my niece or nephew. The room has a wood floor, and the chairs are pretty heavy. When I go back into the room, the chair I was sitting on is right up against the unit, placed as if someone was sitting on it and looking at the pictures. My boyfriend thought it could be when I stood up to take after him, but we tried it out and the chairs were so heavy, it barely moved. We thought it could have been my dog, but he's too small, and we would have heard the noise of the chair against the floor. We have no explanation for it, and it's so weird that it's against the one place that my relatives' pictures are on. It really creeped me out, and I'm kind of scared to be alone in the house again. When I was 9 years old, my family moved to a brand new house in Berks County, Pennsylvania. It was a new construction house, but the property was older, and there used to be old logging trails that people would cut wood down and drag it down. For the first few years, everything was fine. Nothing crazy that I can remember. When I was about 12 or 13, I started noticing weird things. I would be downstairs in the basement. The dog would be lying next to me. And I would hear people walking upstairs while nobody was home. I remember one time I went to take a shower and kept hearing somebody walk past the door. I was convinced somebody was in my house trying to rob it. I opened the door, nobody was there. Fast forward to when I was in 7th grade. It was just after Christmas and I'd gotten my first cell phone. I was up late texting my girlfriend and I kept feeling as if somebody was behind me, watching me. I kept looking behind me to see nothing until the last time I saw her.
It was an old lady with long, shaggy blonde hair. I freaked out. The next thing you know, she was gone. A few months later, I had a friend come to my house. I was in the shower and told him to just come in and watch TV in the living room until I got out. I get out of the shower and my friend is pale white. I ask him what's wrong, and he asks if my grandmother or somebody else was at the house. I told him no, and he described that same old lady I had seen, and this was before I even told him. I sat down and told him the situation, and we were both freaked out. So after this, I didn't see her physically, but I remember being in 8th or ninth grade and waking up every night at the same time from a horrible nightmare. I forget the time now. In this nightmare, I would see the old lady and she would kill me in every dream, but in a different way. This absolutely freaked me out. After I had this happen, I told some of my closest friends and they started telling me they saw weird things at my house. Orbs in rooms, the old lady, bad dreams. I remember the one night, it was me and a buddy laying there. He was on the floor and I was on the bed. I felt something touch my leg and I jumped a little. At the same time, he jumped as well. I asked him why, and he told me something touched his leg. Now, I can't exactly say what happened. If the property was possibly haunted, or maybe something happened that triggered me to see this, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, creeped me the hell out.
I am now 29 and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I won't give the name of the site or specific area to keep my job secure. This is going to be a long-winded post, but I'm confident that anybody interested in the paranormal will be satisfied. So here goes. So I was in the army at the time, when one of my closest friends landed this job first. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs whilst I got my momentum back in regular life, and also got myself an SIA license. Eventually, my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer, and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal, let's call him Jason, kindly drove me to the sites for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth man in his 50s, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences I've had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about 2 guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at this site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing there. He's a lot deeper into this stuff than I am, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we've shared many deep conversations about the subject. Saturday night, during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time and was ready to spend the next 12 hours alone enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. Gaming laptop straight out, albeit on whisper volume of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking, as it is out in the sticks somewhat and surrounded by farmland. But I'm very used to cutting about in the dark in places similar to my time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. For the first few shifts, I just heard the odd strange noise, which quite frankly could have been anything, from temperature expansion or contraction to wildlife. However, on the night prior to the staff returning to work for 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life, which genuinely scared me. It was the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as I put one foot out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off the metal lockers, desk, etc., at head to torso height. I'm 6 feet tall. This didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way.
The first part of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story, medium-sized office building, where there are lots of stone pebbles to walk on, before coming out from the back of the offices and onto a relatively large car park, about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed next to me, and I thought nothing of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel toe boots and not felt it whatsoever. I got halfway across the car park, and another landed just in front of me, as if it came from behind me. This is when I started to feel things weren't quite right, as the pebbles were way back at this point, and I would have felt it this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left, and a huge biffa skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking in between these for about 30 meters, and this is by far the creepiest part of the site, as it's so dark and dingy. This is when things start to get intense. I was still walking towards this area, and roughly 20 meters away when another pebble hit the biffa skip loudly, about 5 to 6 feet high. In other words, I would have had to get a bit of a run up and put effort into booting a pedal hard enough to get it high enough and to match the force it hit with. This really startled me, and I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds, looking all around myself, but there was nobody, and I was equipped with a 400 lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance. Nobody whatsoever. I reluctantly carried on out of duty down the alley past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I had gotten about 10 meters past the first shipment container when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and gave it a massive whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants whole, and it took every ounce of courage to immediately run back onto the car park and shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they could have gotten away in time unless they could contest Usain Bolt, and even that would be a stretch, considering it probably took me 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. The guard who gave me the induction is so interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happens, no matter the hour. So I continued to the centre of the car park to get a full field of view of the site, but of course, nobody. Suddenly I heard bang, 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 coming from all directions, but confined to within the site. Shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins, with a low trajectory similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me, is that the direction they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse, with no windows or doors from my point of view. So these tiny stones were being thrown at me from an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there was 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, just whizzed by my legs left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me, and not over the warehouse, which would be next to an impossible feat anyway. I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I've never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humour him anyway, all the while crapping my pants. I called out to it. Can't remember what I said, and everything immediately stopped and went silent. Nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said he's never known anybody get terrorised quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the blokes managing the site, and he said he would check the CCTV footage for any messes. Interestingly, the next shift a couple days later, the cleaner who used to be around for a couple hours after the staff left, called me into the office block to see a document printed out of an email. This was to my security firm about the events, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I've had very sparse experiences, such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen. Very annoying, as security often gets the blame for this, understandably. Cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along the dusty warehouse floor, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I also got another very close friend. A job there who was also in the army prior, and also a massive skeptic until now. He literally laughed at myself and Jason whilst we gave him his induction when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh as his attitude soon get straight. So a few nights into my other friend, let's call him Scott, working there, I get woken up to a phone call at about 1:30 a.m. And it's Scott with a trembly voice saying that somebody has just sprinted up the stairs, ran through the short corridor, and is currently outside the guardroom door. I said, well, you're a security guard. Do your job and see who it is. Of course, nobody was there, and nobody could be there due to the coded doors. I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time now. It seems to have weeks to months of calm, followed by short bursts of activity. I've also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had an experience elsewhere besides one place to which I have video evidence of it. But I'm reluctant to share, and even then, I need permission from the guard who works that particular site. I've even worked at a number of derelict, creepy old mills. Nothing strange going on. December 25th, 2021 marks a special day to many, as well as few. To most, it may be the celebrated birth of the world's saviour. To the children, an excuse to beg for that one expensive toy every kid in America has to have next year. But to me, this was my fiance's, let's call her R, first year together, but mostly my dad's birthday. Born Christmas of 1955 and passing August 21st, 2012. He would have been 66 had he still been here, but I guess life is a flower bed, and the Almighty One always picks the prettiest flowers first. For the past 3 years since I've really picked up an interest in the paranormal, I've made many attempts to make contact with them. Most at night, others during the day, but all attempts seemed futile. It didn't matter. Witching hours seemed to do nothing in my attempts beside bring forth negative spirits, and groups often felt threatening presences, opposed to the kinder ones of other families buried in the graveyard. 3 years of hopelessly searching for my dad's spirit on top of another 6. 9 years total just missing the man. I thought his spirit was lost to time, with the exception of mine and other families' memories. Until tonight. After an action-packed day of Christmas celebration between my family and that of my fiancée, the night finally wound down. I was exhausted. I'm not too far off, but I had one order of business left to attend. I still want to share a drink with Dad for his birthday. The plan was to get a couple shooter bottles of Jack Daniels, since that was his whiskey of choice, according to my brothers. Spend a few minutes at his grave and mourn as I saw fit. Since I had R with, I figured I may as well introduce the two of them. No better time than the present. To my surprise, before leaving, my brothers gave me a 12-pack of Budweiser. It was probably cold, but it wasn't by the time it reached my hands. Oh well, lukewarm beer is better than a hot one, I suppose. Plus, Dad liked Budweiser too, from what I understood, so hopefully he won't complain too much. We take all back roads to the graveyard. It's about 8:30, and the headlights from my Ranger soon become nothing more than lanterns in an abyss of darkness, as rural homes and light posts become empty fields and moonlight. 15 minutes later, and my old short bed rattle fords up the cemetery drive, parking in front of the threshold. I know it's dark, but once I kill the lights in the engine, it's pitch in the cab and a little chilly in the air. I saw fog on the roads leading to the cemetery. There's got to be something active. I can feel it. Before crossing, I announce myself. These spirits are familiar with me. The active ones I know are, since this also served as the location for my first confirmed paranormal experience as an adult. I say my name, explain who R is, ending with, I mean no harm. She's with me. I'm just here to have a beer with my dad. And cross the threshold. I navigate past the headstones, careful not to step on anyone purposely. We reach Dad's grave and I verbally introduce Dad to R, talking briefly about him before cracking open a beer, holding it to his direction and saying, Happy birthday, Dad. This one's for you. Drinking half the beer and pouring the other half for him. Not long after, I'm in R's arms, grieving for about 5 minutes while I lose myself in memories. I noticed she's fidgeted a bit more than usual, so after the song I was playing ends, I say my goodbyes and head to the truck with her in tow, before either my paranoia or the wrong spirit kills me. Either way, I had my gut feeling to wrap things up. As we drive home, R tells me she had noticed a few interactions, asking if insects were active. It's December in the Midwest. It feels like October, but it isn't operating as such. Obviously, I say no, to which she explained felt like a grazing pinch almost. I almost chalk it up to one of the more mischievous spirits, until she asks where Dad used to pinch at when joking around. I tell her, usually around the wrist or forearm. Her response, You're joking with me. I'm shocked and start thinking of other explanations and other hints she got. The one that definitely confirmed my thoughts, or so I believe, was while I was mourning. I had my head on her shoulder. She was standing diagonal to Dad's grave with her left side to him. She felt something almost comfort her, like a parental force. She also noticed her hair messed up, a small tug to let her know something was there before trying to push it behind her ear. When I heard this, I began crying again. I recognized that from my childhood, even the pinch she mentioned. This was all stuff Dad did to me as a kid, so to know he's still doing that reassured me he's all right in a sense, and he's heard me every time I went to him for advice. It's a closure I've looked for quite some time, just never thought I'd feel it. Guess this means I should plan a visit with him more often. What do you think?
I want to say this was around Christmas time. I live in a split-level ranch layout, and downstairs we have a type of living room. Down there is mainly used for my little siblings' play area, but there are 2 couches, and one of which can fold out into a futon. I would sleep down there a few times throughout the week, just because I enjoy the openness of the room. It's not the most comfy thing to sleep on, therefore it takes a little bit to actually fall asleep. This hasn't happened since. This one night, I did nothing out of the ordinary before falling asleep. I just watched some YouTube, and then after a certain point, I decided I was too tired to continue. So I put down my phone and closed my eyes. I remember being in a state in which I felt like I was half awake and half asleep. I can almost explain it as my body was in autopilot, and I was just watching things occurring. I had no control. In this state, I look towards the end of the futon. I see what I believe to be some sort of woman. I say this because it seemed human-like, but I couldn't tell. It was trying to scare me. I wasn't giving in. She looked at me with a confused look, almost like she was saying, "Why am I not staring you?" She then started moving around, trying to scare me again, but with no success. I believe I went back to sleep after this. I then became aware once again. This time, my eyes were closed. I felt something slowly tugging on my arm. The strength began slowly increasing until it stopped. Then out of nowhere, I felt a huge amount of force drag me by my arm. My eyes opened, and I saw many colours spiralling around me. It was almost like the background of the transitions in that 70s show. It was the summer of 2005, and I was about to enter high school. Having just turned 14, and now having access to the internet at home, I spent a lot of that summer staying up late at night. I used to go to bed around 10 p.m., but now it's different. 12 a.m., 1 a.m., and sometimes even 2. My parents didn't care, as long as I didn't do anything too crazy. So I mostly spent that time playing games and talking to friends online. I never really thought much about it at the time, but every once in a while it would get late and I'd randomly spook myself. I guess it was just the weird feeling of being up alone so late. Nothing never really came of that, nor did I expect it to. But then, one night, things changed. Around 2 to 2:30 a.m., I remember looking to my left at my doorway and seeing what looked like a beam of light step out of my sight. As soon as I saw this, I'll admit that I freaked, and I ran and pulled the covers from my bed over my head. Actually, ended up sleeping in the living room that night because my room just freaked me out. I remember friends asking why I vanished that night, but I felt stupid telling them. Obviously, I was just tired and seeing things, so I kept it a secret. Nothing else happened to me for quite a while. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, but I started hearing whispers around the house. No, not ghosts. My parents. They began talking to each other when they assumed I couldn't hear, and the things I heard them say completely caught me off guard. It wasn't until years later they were willing to tell me, but apparently, around the same time, they too were seeing and hearing strange things. One night, my dad walked into my room and gave me a funny look before walking out. According to him, he followed my mom there, but my mom was nowhere to be seen. She was actually in our room sound asleep. My dad told my mom this story assuming I couldn't hear, but I was listening. I also found out about the neighbors seeing a lady sitting out under our front yard tree. I heard about stories of strange sounds and things going missing. Eventually, I too told my parents what I had seen that night, which is when they came clean with me. After that, over the next 10 to 15 years, things continued to be just a bit weird. One night we watched my doorknob turn and let our dog into my room. Explained how she kept getting in when we were gone. Things continued to go missing, only to reappear in odd places. Around Christmas, music boxes would play on their own another time, and the fan started moving slowly on its own as a dark shadow crossed it. Things just continue to happen, and still to this day. We came to call this thing Elsie, the lady who used to live in the house. But this is only a fraction of the things that were to come. While I never did see her again personally, that doesn't mean others haven't. After the whole music box and ceiling fan things kind of went quiet for a while. There was one night when my cousin was over and my closet door flew open on its own. But that could have been something that just fell and knocked it. It wasn't really until the Christmas of 2019 that something would happen to me again. Still living at home at the time, I was once again up late at night playing a game and talking to some friends online. This wasn't unusual for me at all, but typically I'd go to bed before 2:30. That night, however, I was wrapped up in the story of my new game and I lost track of time. So I went to go to bed, and as I was about to turn the light off, I felt something hit the back of my leg. Shocked the heck out of me because I wasn't expecting it. But what's weird was what it was. It seemed to be the broken wheel off of my old desk chair I got rid of. Confused as heck and freaked out both at the same time, I took some pictures of it to prove I wasn't crazy and instantly sent them to my friend I'd been talking to. I have no idea where it came from or how it hit the back of my leg. Chair had been gone for at least 5 to 6 years at that point. After this, the things that happened were just more weird, but nothing major. The cat sleeps in the basement, for example, with the door locked. And there's been multiple times where he's gotten himself out and jumped on me to wake me up. Could chalk that up to forgetting to put him in the basement, but when you personally double check the night before, only to be woken up by the cat, that's just weird. But yeah, the wheel thing was the last real thing to ever happen to me in that house. My fiancée, on the other hand, we warned her that weird things happened in the house, and during one of the first nights she stayed over, she experienced it for herself. She was sleeping on the couch one Saturday, and I was in my room. That's when we both heard and were woken up by the front door opening and closing. I instantly assumed it was someone letting the cat outside and rolled over and went back to sleep. As for her, well, she sat up on the couch and looked, only to see my mom in a white nightgown standing at the door, just looking out with her hands up against the glass. She thought, "That's weird, what is she doing?" and then just lied back down and went to sleep. Yeah, my mom doesn't own a white nightgown, nor has she ever been told the details of stories of what had been seen in that house. Just like the time my dad thought my mom walked into my room because he saw the back of her nightgown. Or the random time another cousin of mine claimed she saw a lady in white walk into our kitchen. What she saw matched up exactly with what other people had seen. And yes, my mom never did get up that morning to let the cat out. It wasn't there. Since then, we've both moved out of that house. And so far at our new one, nothing strange has happened. My parents still live there, so more things could happen. But for now, that's pretty much everything I can remember. When I was little, I lived on the grounds of a very old manor house in the UK. The manor itself was used as a college for teaching courses and was fully fitted out to cater for people to stay for week-long courses. There were bedrooms and a fully functioning restaurant, as well as all the course rooms. My dad actually ran the place, that's why we lived on the grounds. The house came with the job, kind of thing. Anyway, at Christmas, when my grandparents would come and stay, they would stay down at the manor house as we didn't have enough bedrooms at our actual house, and it was only a 5-minute walk away. So one Christmas, my granddad woke up at like 6 a.m. and saw a little girl next to him. At first he suspected it was me, having wandering down to see them. But as he came to more, thinking he needed to get me home before my parents freaked out, he realised the little girl was wearing a bonnet and a long, white, old-fashioned nightdress, and looked nothing like me. She smiled at him and touched his hand. Then a lady in old-fashioned clothes walked through a wall, again smiling at him, picked up the little girl and walked back through the wall. My grandma slept through the entire thing, and although he said he was never afraid, he knew she would be and would refuse to come for any future visits, so he never told her. He did, however, tell my parents, who had already had many strange occurrences at the manor house, so he knew they would believe him. My dad said the thing that gives this story so much credibility is that the rooms they were staying in used to be the old nursery and the nanny's quarters. My grandparents had no knowledge of this at the time. He said it was all very calm and peaceful and not scary, albeit somewhat unnerving. I lived in this house for a very short time while I was in kindergarten. This is an old town, one of the first in my province. This will be a telling of 3 different experiences. Around Christmas time, the weather was fair. It wasn't windy or too cold. I was watching a TV show. I do believe it was Letters to Santa or something. It was on YTV. I was sitting in front of the TV watching my show with the remote beside me, and the TV would flip to the news. A little confused, I would swap it back with the remote. And after a couple of minutes, it would swap to the news again. I was getting a little annoyed, so I called out to my mum, who was in the kitchen, and asked her why she kept swapping the channel, and if she wanted me to watch something else. She looked right at me and said, "The remote is beside you." I'm not touching the TV, which it was. Right after I asked her this, the TV started to flip through a bunch of channels. Then our old touch lamp started to act up. Like someone kept touching it and turning it all the way up, and off all the way up, and off over and over. And then it kept swapping through all the channels. A little freaked out, I yelled, "Stop! Switch it back to my show and stop messing with the lamp." Immediately it stopped and flipped it back to my channel. Nothing like this happened to me again. My mum watched the whole thing, and I remember turning to her, shrugging in my shoulders. My mum also told me she had been experiencing the light being turned off in the kitchen. And it couldn't have just been the power, because the light switch would be off. And this would happen to her all the time while she was just in the kitchen making food. Figure over my bed. This was shortly after I'd asked my parents to move my bed upstairs. I was laying in bed with the street lights coming in the window, and I woke up to a really cold breeze in my bed. Not thinking much, I looked around and saw nothing, and suddenly my curtains, which were the gauzy white see-through ones, flew up over my bed. Like some strong breeze came from under my bed and threw them over the top of me. It was weird, but weirder they fell over the figure of a woman standing by my bed. It scared me. I sat upright and pulled the curtain out of the way so I could see better. And there was no one there. I was terrified, but I just threw my blankets over my head and went to sleep. And just said, "Go away, go away." Closed my eyes real tight. Cowbone in the muck. More creepy, less supernatural. So as a kid, I was all about getting dirty and playing in the mud. I would find mud pits, get as dirty as humanly possible, and then go back home. Change and wash and come back. I had gone out into this mud pit that was right across the street from my house. My parents had left me at home. But this was a small town, and everyone watched everyone's kids. So I'm out playing in the muck up to my knees in mud, digging around, and I happened to find a cowbone. I pulled it out, and as I was making my way back to the street, I sank into some mud up to my hips and couldn't get out. A nice guy came by and fished me out with a shovel. Asked me if I was okay. Everything was cool. When my parents got home, I showed them the bone and we cleaned it off. Later on, me and my friends made a fort outside made of twigs. It was pretty awesome. I put my cowbone in it and came back the next day. While we were looking at the cowbone, we noticed something weird about it, and I went to pick it up. And thousands of daddy longlegs came pouring out of this bone. We promptly, then shortly after that, wasps took it over, so it had to be torn down. A couple of weeks go by, and I'm laying on the floor at my house, sleeping. My aunt's sitting beside me, and I feel tickling. I giggle, and I say to my aunt, "Stop." She says, "Honey, I'm not tickling you." So I go back to sleeping. More tickling. I say, "Auntie, please stop. I'm trying to sleep." And she says, "I'm not tickling you." I pull the blanket I'm under, and I'm covered in daddy longlegs. I scream, hop up, start crying, and brush them off and run to my mum. My mum says it's okay, they're harmless, they won't follow you. Well, they followed me across the floor to my mum, and even my mum was freaked out. I hated that house so much for all the creepy stuff that happened. My husband and I frequent a local weekly farmers market. We generally start up at the top building so he can run to use the bathroom. I stand patiently outside and wait. I'm an anxious and empathetic person, so I just try to keep to myself as I wait. So I'm just standing there, probably staring at the floor or something, and this guy comes out of the bathroom and just stands beside me. Okay, whatever. I look up, and he looks at me and says, "Gonna be a full moon tonight." Said something else about luck, and I just kind of stood there looking at him. Husband comes out of the bathroom, and we head off. A short while later, this man and another man walk by. The man who spoke to me earlier looked my way, said something to the other guy I couldn't catch, and then said, "I'd know her anywhere." Next up, I travel a lot, and we like to visit odd places. We stopped at this radio place where an older woman walked people through. Her husband had collected them and had passed away. There was a smaller shed building and then a garage. I had gone in the shed just a moment, then left my husband to go back to the truck. After a short while, he and the woman came out of the shed. She walked over to me with hands cupped, kind of shyly, and said she had a gift for me. I said, "Oh yeah, a gift?" and put my hands out in front of her where she placed a beaded Christmas spider. She didn't really say much other than there's info online about them. I got out of the truck to follow them along in the garage. I had the gift in my hand. I swear, when I walked through that garage, I felt all these tiny little spiderweb threads tickling my legs and arms. I was brushing at my leg as though to brush it away. No one else seemed to notice. Even after going back outside, I had mentioned it to my husband. He brushed me off like I did the webs. When I was younger, my stuff would get moved, Mom and Grandmother denying even touching it. Another thing I vividly remember is that one of my plushies went off while I was in bed. It was a Build-A-Bear dog with one of those little sound boxes in the paw. No one else was in the room. I was on my bed. The plush was on the floor. My grandmother told me that she used to hear footsteps around the house. These have since ceased. Around Christmas of 2019, my grandmother and cousin were making challah bread. They briefly went over to the dining table to talk with my mom while the dough was kneading in the mixer. I'll note that it was a heavy KitchenAid mixer. The mixer flew across the room right next to my grandmother's foot. The cord was unplugged and out straight behind it. Even if the mixer had vibrated itself off of the counter, it would have fallen straight down, not 10 feet away. Things have been going missing more often since then. One Saturday morning, I had lost my phone. I remembered it last being with me in the living room. We looked all over for it, and my grandmother found it in my mom's room. I know I didn't go in there that morning, and had no reason to. I told them that I thought we had a ghost. My 3DS had gone missing a week or two prior to the phone incident. I still couldn't find it by the time my phone went missing. I had looked everywhere for it, stripped my bed, checked the drawers, etc. I jokingly asked our ghost for it back, and looked on my bed once again. It was under a shirt, in the last place I looked. Yesterday, my game case went missing. I had them last either downstairs or in my room out in the open. I looked for the case in the drawer where I kept all of my other gaming equipment. It's not there. Since I started noticing a pattern, I asked for my games back. After looking for a while, I get the urge to look in the gaming drawer, and there it is. Last night, I was up late. Everyone was asleep. When I was downstairs a few moments prior, I felt like I was being watched. When I was upstairs and in my room, I said, "Yo, if there's any spirits here, you're chill and I like you." Right after I said that, I heard 2 footsteps in the hall, outside my door. They didn't go anywhere. Here's what tops the cake. My dog barks at a specific corner in the living room sometimes. I'm okay with the ghost, since they're friendly and haven't harmed anyone or anything. But it doesn't mean I'm not freaked out by this. These are all very real to me, and I'm sorry if I sound insane. My dad died about 6 weeks ago, and I hadn't seen him since Christmas. Since he died, I've fairly constantly felt more of a presence in my flat than usual. The living room in particular just feel like he's around somehow. I know these are fairly common experiences after bereavement and while grieving regardless, so I'm specifically asking about something else I've been experiencing. About a week after Dad died, I heard a noise from the living room while I was about to go to sleep. For context, because of the weird layout of our flat, the living room and bedroom have an adjoining door that's usually open at night. It was very clear and fairly loud and came from that direction. It was a single clinking metallic noise, like the sound you get when you tap a teaspoon against a mug, or when someone taps a knife on a glass to give a speech at a wedding. That's the best way I can describe it. Rationally, I thought it was one of those weird noises your brain produces when you're falling asleep that jerks you awake. But it felt so clear and external that I instinctively asked my husband, "What was that?" And he said, "The sound like someone stirring their tea? Yeah, I heard that too." It's only happened once or twice since then, always at night. Always quite loud, and always from the same place. I'm usually awake longer than my husband, so after the first time, I've had nobody else to verify. But I've not been actively falling asleep, so I doubt it's hypnagogic. It's more startling than actually scary. We have pet rats in the living room who do make a fair bit of noise at night, but that's more consistent rattling and moving around rather than one distinct isolated sound. We also haven't got much anything in their cage, and that could make that very clear chiming noise. I never heard it before Dad's death either, and something about it doesn't feel explainable. It's funny me connecting it to Dad, because he was very dismissive of the supernatural. But even before these sounds started, I felt the need to talk in my head to this presence, asking him not to manifest in any overt way, because I don't think I could handle it right now. It almost feels like he's trying to say I'm here, without freaking me out too much. This incident took place 6 months back, after the Diwali festival. We have rented a house, and we've been staying there for almost a year. We have a neighbour who's a lady working in a hospital as a nurse. She was nice to us. She sometimes shared food with us. On Diwali occasion, we went back to our hometown because of holidays, but my sister came up early because she had some important office work. So after a couple of days later, I also came back and I was feeling uncomfortable in my apartment. I had a feeling that something bad happened. I came at that day late at night. I couldn't sleep because I didn't feel normal the whole night. I was awake, and around 2:30 a.m, I felt someone very close to me. I got out of bed and checked my room, but nothing was there. So I went back to get to sleep. Again, I felt someone was close to me, so I just stayed in the blanket and stayed awake the whole night. The next day, I asked my sister that where is our neighbour. I haven't seen her. My sister simply said nothing and ignored my questions, so I didn't ask twice. And a couple of days later, I told her about my experience, and then she told me the truth. My sister told me that our neighbour has been found dead in her apartment last week. My sister was crying while telling me this, and I was in trauma for a few seconds because I couldn't believe she was whole dead. Then I realised why I was feeling uncomfortable on that day when I got back to my apartment from my hometown. That lady was a good person. During Ramadan in the morning, she used to cook for us for a fast. She treated me like her son. Can't believe she's gone. I don't know her family background, but I know she was staying all alone in that apartment. I didn't get a good chance to say goodbye to her. That was the bad part. This isn't scary at all, but sometimes I feel her around me. Never seen, but I feel she's there. When I pass her apartment, I feel like the door will open and she'll come outside with her smile. I know it's never going to happen, but I always look at that apartment anyway. In my hometown, there are loads of restored Victorian houses. The city is very strict with them. Any renovation in certain parts of town has to be approved by a historical preservation committee. So it raised questions when I saw that this house was a duplex. We lived in the lower unit. It was freaking gorgeous. The house was over 100 years old with hand-carved wood moulding and mostly original floors. You could tell that what was part of the original structure and what was added on to make the duplex. Josh's room, the full bathroom, and my room were the addition. My room would have been built into the closet underneath the stairs. The living room and dining room had all original wood floors. They restored them the best they could, but there was a 5-foot dark stain in the living room and a similar mark in a large corner of the dining room. The landlord told us there's only so much you can do with these old houses, and we understood. We were lucky to get such a lovely place with a modest rent in a cool part of town. I was the first one to notice the weird vibe in the house. When friends would come over, I would ask if they felt it too, and most of them agreed. Whenever I was in the kitchen, I felt like I was being watched from behind. Watched hard. Stared down. Every time I turned to look, my eye would get drawn to the same spot in the doorway, directly above the big dark stain in the dining room. I tried to tell myself that it was probably not real, but it felt like my brain was picking up on stimuli that couldn't be detected by my eyes. The only knowledge of dealing with the paranormal is to not let them push you around. Take strict dominance. You have to establish boundaries since you truly don't know what you're dealing with, and the fear gives them the upper hand. I said out loud that I acknowledge their presence and I'm allowing them to exist in the same space as I do. That could always be revoked. I paid rent, so I had seniority. That feeling of being watched started showing up at random times when I would be in my room soon after. It wasn't just that anymore either. You know how sometimes you can tell a person is nearby before they make any indication that they're there? It was like that. I stared at the spot where it originated from, but there was nothing there. It felt like someone was peeking their head around the corner, just like in the kitchen. This would happen for short periods before fading away behind the wall. It would happen like that every so often throughout the night. Every night. And every time it happened, I was reflexively skeptical and told myself, nah, that's not real. I repeated that mantra more and more often in the coming months. In October, it finally got cold enough for us to turn the central heating on. My roommate mentioned making sure our vents were open. I looked in my room and saw mine was shut. Once I realized this, a pit opened up at the bottom of my stomach. This meant all the times I saw my Christmas lights hanging up around my room, gently swaying, it wasn't caused by the air moving through the vents. Also, we had no air conditioner that could have been moving them. It was caused by something else. The presence continued to emerge off and on. I chalked it up to my active imagination, since it didn't seem like my other roommates were affected by it. At some point, I even talked to the neighbours upstairs, who told me they also felt a weirdness about the place. One night, when I had a friend over in my room, I was walking through the living room turning all the lights off. I turned the final one off and started back towards my room in the dark. As I was passed over the stain in the living room, I heard a voice behind me. It was gentle and subtle, with an upward inflection, like it was asking a question. I whipped around to see nothing, but heard firm footsteps approaching me from the corner. I noped into my room, where my friend was sitting. He asked what my problem was, and I told him the house might be haunted. He laughed at me and told me to get real. Not 2 minutes later, he goes, "Did you see that?" And I asked, "See what, buddy?" He said my hula hoop jumped off the wall where it was hanging. He stared at it intensely, trying to formulate a rational explanation for what he saw. I don't think he ever found one. This was one of the most witnessed events in that house. We had a crew of people watching something engaging when we heard glass shatter in the kitchen. A handful of us stood up and went into the kitchen, where the light fixture above the sink was shattered in the sink basin. Out of seemingly nowhere, it had detached itself from the ceiling and exploded. We passed it off as a freak accident. One of us got in touch with the landlord, and we carried on with the night. I kept feeling the presence studying me, so I tried to figure out what kind of entity I was dealing with. Granted, I had no experience or understanding of the paranormal, only what I had seen in the media. When I opened my mind and tried to be receptive, I got some tentative information. It was a girl, a younger girl, possibly a preteen. The number 14 was something that was coming to mind. She was blonde with curly hair, wearing an old school sailor outfit. She may have lived in the house before it became 2 units. The personality I got was a timid, curious child who suffered greatly and died in fear. I was dying to learn the history of that place, but I had no idea where to start. In my casual research on it, I was disappointed my state has no laws stating you have to disclose someone dying in a house. Strange occurrences started to become routine. I thought we reached the peak of activity and I didn't have to have my guard up. One night, as I was on my laptop, the Christmas lights hanging right next to my bed lifted drastically off the wall for a split second. It looked like an invisible force playfully tossed it upward. At that moment, I decided to revoke her access to my space. I said out loud that she was no longer welcome in my room. Thinking in haste, I scrolled through my minimal mental archive of the subject to remember what can be used against ghosts on TV. Salt. I needed salt. As quickly as possible, I retrieved the salt from the kitchen and poured it on the doorframe above the threshold. I felt more comfortable that I had a defensive barrier. but also wasn't sure if it would work. It was difficult to sleep that night. After I placed the salt, I stopped experiencing unexplainable things in my room. I still felt like I was being watched, but only in the kitchen. Things were mild now, and I thought I had nothing to worry about. This has been a learning experience for me, and I wanted to document what happened so I could explain to people why I believe in ghosts. I took my notebook into the living room and started to write. As usual, I felt something peeking around the corner, but this time it was more pronounced than any previous instance. Did she know I was writing about her? My roommate sat down next to me, and I told him what I was doing. As I was in mid-sentence, directly behind where I sat, the couch under us moved. It felt like someone slowly picked it up by the corner and put it down. I immediately jumped up and ran outside. A few months after our lease was up, I was hanging out with one of my former roommates. The topic of the creepy feeling in our house came up in conversation. That's when she told me there was a fire long ago. I'm not sure how she learned this, but a lot of things make sense. Like the fact that it's a duplex and the burn marks on the floor. Is it possible that those burn marks were caused by burning flesh? Did the spirit who remained there die before their time? Was this just a series of coincidences? Will I ever get answers to my questions? Back when I was in college, I had to take a few night classes to finish my program. I was going to school for drafting, and one of the classes was only offered at 5 p.m. This was a bit of a pain for me, as I still lived with my parents, and the college was located an hour away. So getting off at 3 p.m, then driving home, and heading back was pointless. That's why I typically stayed and just killed time at the school unit until it was time. Sometimes my dad, who worked down the street from the school, would wait around, and my mum would meet us for dinner. But other times it was just me killing time. Yeah, it was a pain, but you do what you have to do. One day, near the end of the semester, both of my parents decided to meet up with me, just as we had before. It was getting close to Christmas, and this town happened to be where our closest mall was located. So they decided to use the chance to get in some Christmas shopping. And after we finished eating, they did just that. I went to school, they went shopping, and that was that. Or at least, that's what I thought. With Inventor, despite it lasting a few hours, you could leave whenever you wanted. We were allowed to work ahead, and he didn't care when you left as long as your assignment was done. Being someone who picked up on the program and 3D modeling quickly, I was in the group of kids who were constantly 10 or so models ahead, so it didn't matter when I usually left. This being the end of semester, however, I was out of work to do. I reached the end, so I ended up leaving class extra early, so I called my parents to let them know. They were still at the mall, so I drove over there to meet up with them. I did some shopping myself, and then we packed up the 2 cars to leave. Since they had gifts for me, my dad decided to drive one car, while my mom went with me in mine. Dad left first, so I didn't see what they had inside, and I took out after him. Back then, I still hated driving at night, so I followed him closely on the way back. My dad is a crazy safe driver, so it took longer following him, but it was okay. Felt safer with him in the lead. Getting close to home, we arrived at the T outside of the town I'll call RL. My dad was at the stop sign ready to turn left, but a car was coming. So my dad, being an extra safe driver, he proceeded to peel out and cut the guy off. Now RL isn't the safest town around, and when the guy slammed on his brakes and stopped in the road, I was scared. This is where people would get shot, and the guy stopping terrified me. I sat at the stop sign myself and had no idea what to do. Do I go? Do I wait? What's this crazy guy gonna do? I sat there for a few minutes freaked out before my mom finally said, "Just go." So I did. And the whole time I kept my eyes on the grey car as I slowly pulled out and passed them. They're gone. My mom's screaming shocked me, and I remember saying, "What are you talking about?" As I too realised the car I was passing was not there. In fact, another car then passed through where the first car was sitting. The car was gone. Where I was looking was empty. Later, when I got home, we asked my dad about it and he was confused. According to him, there never was a car. He wondered why we stopped and said we were the only ones on the road. Minus the guy he passed down the road a ways 5 or so minutes later. So what did we see? Every time I passed that road, I looked to see if maybe something could have reflected light and made it look like a car. But there's nothing there. Just a cornfield. I've been struggling with anxiety and depression for the past years, but this went to break more than usual. And this afternoon, for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to take one long trip down memory lane. So, I plugged in my external DVD reader and started looking at old photos and videos from when I was 10 to 15. I'm 24 now. I stumbled upon a picture from 2006, Christmas Day, with me, my sister, my uncle, and 2 second-degree cousins whom I just met for the first time. It's not important, but they were 24 and 22 at the time, and were the sons of the aunt's sister. I was watching all these old photos with my mother and sister. After feeding my need of watching old embarrassing photos of my family from back in the day, I went outside for a smoke. When I came back, my mom was literally shouting when I rang the bell that the weirdest thing just happened. She was cleaning the kitchen table, and my father's cell phone was on the table alongside other things. And she just piled them up together and moved them on the chair that was nearby. After 10 seconds, the phone started saying something of the likes, "The number you're trying to reach is non-existent." My father picked the phone up, and it was trying to call my dead aunt's old number, which was saved in my dad's contact list from all those years ago. It hadn't been used since. He freaked out on how it was possible, because the phone unlocks with the pin of the fingerprints. And anyhow, even if it magically unlocked, it should have at least tried to automatically call one of the last dialed numbers. Not a number that hadn't been used in 9 years. We're all pretty freaked out by this experience. Kinda gives us the chills. I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there and in other prisons I worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was like 3 a.m. at this point. No prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working in was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small, quiet cells in a hallway, not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was at a loss for words. Later that night, I checked the door again, and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. Another experience I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 or 2 a.m, and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room, and no one is sitting at the table I just saw on camera. I ask my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station and we both watch this video over and over. Later on the same night, during one of my rounds, I noticed a wet floor sign that got left out. I returned it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is and see the same wet floor sign out. I ask my partner if they're playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away. My partner denies anything to do with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. Get back to the officer station, wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end very slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeds to slide quickly up the hallway and then back to in front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night because we were scared shitless. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our close observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say they're suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they're a lot cooler and near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras and all of a sudden, we saw a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they're okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right, and they're hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner called for assistance because the prisoner had bit the skin of their own wrists, causing them to bleed, held them above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that's now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had there. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices, cold chills. The first really noticeable experience I had was around Christmas time on the 3rd shift. I was working in the oldest unit of the facility. Usually, we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained, because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night, watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older, unused condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs stand on end. I close the door thoroughly and creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because I'm scared shitless. One day on the 3rd shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. It was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see, because this section is so old it's not powered. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled with a feeling of dread. I ask my friend to head back, and we start to head back down to where the hallway to the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway, barely able to see anything in almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the keys as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. When I was a kid, I guess I used to have night terrors where my parents couldn't wake me up. I guess I would sleepwalk sometimes and my mum would find me talking to the wall. I grew out of it mostly. I guess I was a weird kid. But sometimes I'll have a nightmare and wake myself up by screaming. So getting to the full story. I recently went home for Christmas and couldn't stay in my bedroom in the basement because it's currently a construction zone. So my mom has moved my bed into my old sister's room on the second floor. Now this room is creepy. It seems like a totally normal room, but when you're in it for too long, you start to get paranoid and there's a general sense of dread. It used to be my bedroom until I moved to the basement. So I go through Christmas break and all, and everything's fine. Even sleeping in the creepy room. When I fly back to Chicago, and things start to not be normal. I live in a studio, and it's rather large, but my cats have really been up my butt lately. Like, they won't leave me alone, and have to be in the same area as me at all times. They even sleep with me all night, which is where it gets concerning. I sleep all through the night normally, but I've been having the same dream every freaking night, where around 2 or 3 a.m., something creeps up from under my bed and is squatting by me and grabs my arm. It looks like the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth. I chalked it up to stress. Well, this morning, I woke up because I went back to sleep after the same dream, and my arm hurts, and I have some weird bruising. My mother passed away shortly after Christmas last year. The night before her death, I had a weird dream. My uncle, who died at 74, was in the dream, and he was a very young man. We were in a house, and I was talking to the redhead actress from Longmire. My mother was a tall, lanky redhead like that. I was in the kitchen with my uncle, and outside, my grandmother was gardening. She was his and my mother's mother. She helped raise me. My grandmother waved at me through a cloudy glass. It was like hand-blown glass, wavy and imperfect, so she was blurry. But I could tell she had her younger figure and black hair. I was talking to my uncle when he put a finger on the side of my head. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm fixing you." There was a very bright golden light, and I woke up. I woke up feeling very good, very calm. When my wife woke up, I immediately told her about the dream. I then told my adult son, who was curious about the dream because he had a weird but unrelated dream that night as well. That afternoon, my brother called and told me our mother had died in her sleep that night. I have a lot of curiosity about this dream. My mother was ill, but she wasn't terminal. Was it my subconscious? Or was it something more? Was it a deeper experience than just the simple subconscious programming? I found myself seeking God in the months since then, struggling to stoke the fire of faith that I had long ago lost because of the betrayal of my former church's minister. He did something very horrible, and it deeply harmed my wife and my faith. I want to believe in God, and I find myself feeling his presence, but there's just some little part of me that keeps looking for a scientific explanation. I would love input and constructive ideas. Was it actually my dead relatives? Thoughts on the afterlife? and similar experiences.
So the first one isn't exactly paranormal, but more so a miracle. My mum was pregnant with me and my sister. We were identical twins. Fast forward a few months into the pregnancy, my mum was having signs of labour, so she went to the hospital. My sister's cord was wrapped around my right hand and cutting off my circulation. So in a crazy weird way, my sister saved my life by putting my mum into labour. My mum had no idea that I was losing circulation. If my sister never put my mum into labour, I would have died. Sadly, my sister passed inside my mum's stomach, so I like to think of her as my guardian angel. I went to get a butterfly tattoo one day for her. The second experience is also related to my sister. My mum had an ex that we lived with for a few months. Well, they got into a fight and he knocked over my mum's Christmas tree. Every single ornament broke besides my sister's ornament. It makes no sense because it's really old and fragile and seems too crazy of a coincidence to me. So we still have that ornament every Christmas now. The third experience is after my grandpa passed. He passed December 26th of 2020 after getting COVID and having to stay in the hospital. I don't have a good relationship with my family, so I wasn't invited to his funeral, and I was the last person to know about his death. About a week later, I was asleep and heard a loud "Hello, Lex," with his voice in my ear. I woke up super fast thinking it was my mom pulling a prank on me to wake me up, but she was asleep on the couch. I've never had anything happen similar to that, so I like to think maybe he was saying hi since I couldn't say bye.
December 23, 2000. I just flew in from college for winter break. It was a late arrival and had to drive close to an hour home from the airport. After spending some time catching up with my mum and grandma, I decided I needed to sleep. My room shared with my sister had been left unchanged. She was not there that night. It's now early morning, Christmas Eve. To set the scene, this house and room are small. It's a very small one-level ranch home. The room was a box big enough for one twin bed on one side of the room and my twin bed on the other. Offset parallel, set up that the heads and pillow area were opposite of each other, and the ends of the beds overlap by a few feet. Basically, a head-to-toe format. There's approximately 2 or 3 inches between the beds. Anyway, from my bed, I can see out the door, down the hallway where our bathroom was, and I could see just past that to the beginning of the dining room. My mom and grandma stayed in the family room with the TV on, and this is just by the dining room. Again, in a small house, you can hear everyone and everything with little effort. Anyway, I roll to my side and look over to the corner where my sister's head would normally be on her pillow. I see this odd white glow in the corner over her head. I stay to watch because I get the sense it's okay, only love. In the past with any paranormal event, I usually noped right out of there or was afraid. This white glow is in the shape of what I believe is an angel. I can see that it's tall, the head, wings outline, then I see a figure that's standing in front of it. This figure is white and glowing as well, but I can see 2 separate shapes. It steps out, places its hands together in a prayer sign, and bows. It backs up and it disappears. When reality sets in with what I just saw, frozen now that fear has taken over, I yell for my grandma. Grandma! What? Can you turn the hall light on? I just saw a ghost. She turns the hall light on, and I remember her saying, 20 years old and still believes in ghosts, and needs a light on. I felt mad at that point, for mocking me for believing in something she has had experiences with. Yes, it was the family that said they believed in ghosts, but the minute one of us kids would have an experience, it wasn't credible and just our imagination. I fell asleep and woke around 6 a.m. to the phone ringing. It was an unexpected call, and I heard my grandma talking to the caller and began crying. Her uncle had unexpectedly passed away in the night after having minor surgery to remove a small patch of skin carcinoma. He He was in his late 70s. This was her favourite and oldest uncle, the only one I knew that she spoke with. Now, looking back, it makes sense since they were only about 10 years apart in age. I never met him since he lived a few states away. Funny to only know someone by a few mail correspondences and phone conversations. My grandma would go visit him as a break from us. I remember she spent most of Christmas Eve mourning in her bedroom. Family comes over in the evening, which are her sons, my uncles. I'm in my room and they're in the dining room table, talking, and I heard my name mentioned and I began listening. I heard my grandma talk about a 20-year-old seeing things and needing her grandma to turn the light on. They all laugh. And then I hear my one uncle call for me. I go out to them knowing what they were just talking about. He asks me to tell them what I saw. I tell them. Right as I was finishing, my grandma shoots up and runs to her room and slams the door. She's crying. The focus is off of me, and my one uncle is at her door asking what's wrong. She lets my uncle in. About 20 minutes later, he comes out and tells my other uncle and I, very seriously, that my grandma was upset because she'd just figured it out. Her uncle came to say goodbye to her. The angel arrived the same time her uncle died, in the room she slept in when her uncle last visited many years ago, and his way of saying goodbye was with the prayer hands and bow.